Last weekend, I missed being in here because I was with your kids, and we had a fantastic time. We had a really good time hanging out with those guys, and they were real responsive, so I'm going to expect the same here, okay? Going to really be engaged. So let's all stand and do, I want to be a Jesus Ranger. Oh. That's what we were doing last week. We were having a lot of fun, and it was fun for me to get to do that. But I did miss hearing Michelle, so I'll have to check out the podcast and listen to the message. And I know everybody here really enjoyed that. We are in the third part of the Perspective series. And I'm struck by those last 6 words that were read. It's funny how they have, even in modern times, a connection for us that we can identify with them, and I'll go through a couple of things with you to help you remember. The last 6 words, land of Nod, east of Eden. He went out to the land of Nod, east of Eden. Land of Nod for us in more modern times, and first is an older poem that all of us are familiar with, a lullaby that was written by, it was a piece of work that was written by Eugene Field somewhere between 1850 and 1895, a famous lullaby that you and I have heard, and maybe we've even recited to our kids, winkin', blinkin', and nod, right? And of course, if you study behind the scenes what that's all about, and you've ever held a little baby or a toddler in the time that they're starting to get sleepy, you know that winkin', is the left eye, blinking is the right eye, and of course nod is that head. And winking and blinking and nod is what is going on as that toddler is getting sleepy, and this poem was often read or song sung in order to advance that purpose and help the child go to sleep. Of course, in even more modern times, Crate and Barrel also named a children's furniture company after this, and it called it their children's furniture company. Maybe some of you were there to buy something for your children's rooms or baby's bed, and you may know it. It's called the Land of Nod, and you can go in and shop, and it's all just children's things, from baby's beds and those kinds of things. And then, of course, East of Eden. It's a novel by the Nobel Prize-winning John Steinbeck, published in 1957. It's Steinbeck's work that it's a retelling of the story of Cain and Abel, and I'm a huge fan of Steinbeck. This was his best piece. This obviously was his best work. I've always been a fan of Steinbeck's, but I had not read East of Eden until about 8 years ago or so. And of course, what I was familiar with, what you may be familiar with, Of Mice and Men, Grapes of Wrath, The Winter of the Discontent. But Steinbeck's East of Eden pulls back the curtain for us on the story of Cain and Abel in a more modern setting, and shows the depravity of man and the sin of mankind in a way that is riveting as you watch it. How many of you have seen the movie with James Dean and the East of Eden movie? Anyone? Am I the lone Steinbeck fan here? Salinas, California is the backdrop and the setting, and I would encourage you to at least see the film. But something happened to me upon reading East of Eden that was really, I wasn't expecting to happen to me. And I read it in conjunction with some preparation for something that I wanted to do in terms of messages and writings, understanding, having a little bit different angle or look at this story of Cain and Abel. And something happened to me in reading this story that I didn't expect at all, and that is that I came away with a deep sorrow and hurt for Cain. Just reading through the story and familiarizing myself again with the passages, the 16 verses that we just read a moment ago. Cain is the protagonist of the story that we read, but he's not the villain. Cain is the main character of the story. In fact, Abel doesn't even have any speaking parts in the story. And if you really take a deep look at what's going on here, Cain is us. We, you and me, all of humanity. In Steinbeck's extensive novel, he attempts to and barely touches on the subject matter of this passage. He takes 500 pages in an attempt to plumb the depths of a passage that's 16 verses long, and he falls woefully short in doing so. This morning, we will in no way plumb the depths of this passage, but we will hopefully help turn your perspective and help you see something differently, help you see sin in a way that you have never seen it before, and walk away from it hopefully with a better understanding of what it is. You see, Cain's problem, in a word, is sin. That was Cain's problem. Now, what is sin? And often we begin, when we're defining something together, by talking about what sin is not. It's helpful to understand what it's not so that we can better understand what it is. And so I want to start by telling you what sin is not. Sin is not wrong choices. Sin is not moral infractions. Sin is not making a bad decision of your own free will. I often get this question as a pastor and, throughout ministry. I've had people come and approach me with this question, and listen closely to the question. They'll say, is it a sin to, and then they will go on and describe whatever it is. Now listen closely again to what they're asking. Is it a sin to do? Is it a sin to think? Is it a sin to say? And they'll continue after that. Everything about that question is wrong. If I can do anything today that will be helpful to you about changing your perspective about sin, I hope it is that when we walk away this morning, we will never again say, is it a sin to do something in particular? I want to share with you a passage that helps illuminate what sin is really all about. Out of Romans chapter 7, verses 18 through 20. And it's Paul's writing, and he writes to us something about the dilemma that he finds himself in. And he says, and I know that nothing good lives in me. That is, in my sinful nature, I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I am not really the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. That's written 2,000 years ago, and there's not a person in this room that can't deeply identify with those words and understand. I know you understand this. I know you do. I know most of you in a personal way, and I know you understand this. You know you're not perfect, right? And I think you know enough to know that everybody else on the planet is not perfect either, right? So I know that about yourself, and I know that is deeply entrenched. But let me ask you this. Do you know that the person behind you, the person beside you, the person in front of you, does things all the time that they don't want to do? And they can't stop. That's weird. That's weird, isn't it? I mean, it really does demand some kind of an explanation. Well, we're reading that Paul said, I can't. I want to do what's right. I see what to do that is right, and I don't do it. In fact, not only do I not do what is right, but often I do exactly what is wrong. And that's just weird, isn't it? And we find that really kind of troubles us and messes with us in terms of understanding what is going on? What is happening with me? And the answer Paul gives us is that it is sin living in me. That's not a sin that did something. That's sin living inside of me. There is a power of chaos, destruction, and anarchy that is waging war within me. And Paul goes on to reveal this further. He says, I have discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God's law with all of my heart. But there is another power within me at war with my mind, and this power makes me a slave to sin that is still within me. This conversation that God has with Cain gives us an incredible insight to the struggle that we all have with sin. God warns Cain in advance. He says, if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at your door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. Now, the metaphor that's given to us here is a picture of a lion kind of in hiding, waiting for an unsuspecting person to walk by, leap on them and overpower them before they even know what is going on. They are in the clutches of the lion. They are under the power of this beast that is about to rip them to shreds and tear them apart. It's a picture that sticks in our minds. It is a metaphor that lives for us, and we can all understand and identify with it. And one of the frightening things about this story is the advance warning, that in the face of the warning that God gave Cain, he continues down a path as if he is no longer in control of himself and destroys his life. Sin overtakes him. In a moment of time, Cain lost everything. 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 Sin took him out. Now the question is, can sin take you out? Can sin take me out? And the answer is obvious. Yes, we see it all the time, don't we? We turn on the nightly news and we hear the stories of famous people who've been taken out by sin. One bad, thing happens in their life. It snowballs, and all of a sudden they are completely out of the picture, destroyed. But we also see it and read about it of common people. They lost everything to sin, and it took them out. Which leads us back to our opening remarks we made describing sin. Since sin is not a moral infraction of some kind, we don't get to the beginning of the year, it's 2017, and so we say, among my resolutions, I'm going to lose 10 pounds this year, and also I'm going to try to sin less, right? If we do that, we should stop it. We should stop it. Because it's describing to us that sin is out to kill you. If someone is out to kill you, we don't start with a resolution at the beginning of the year and say, I'm going to be less of a target this year. We go get some training, we get armed, and we get ready for battle, and we are looking at every moment, suspecting that someone is out to kill us, and we are going to get them first, right? Because Paul said the only solution for you is sin is out to kill you. You need to kill it first. You need to destroy sin before it destroys you. The language that Paul used was put it to death. God uses this language with Cain. He says, either sin will master you, or you with my help will master sin. We can no longer think of sin as some kind of a moral improvement thing that we're on, I didn't cuss very many times this week. There are no quarters in the jar. We can no longer play around with this. We have to understand that it's out to kill, to steal, and to destroy our lives. And we have to get serious about waging war. To be a captive to sin is to be under the power and the control of the destroyer. And so now the question for us is, how do we win against sin? Is there a way for us to win against sin? And here's the good news, there is. And one of the key things that I would say to you this morning is to think like a chess player. Great chess players, they want to know what the first moves of their opponent are, because they want to be able to defense against those first and initial moves. Because if you know anything about chess, you know that those initial moves are setting up something 8, 10 moves down the line. You know, it's kind of a charade in a manner of speaking that they're putting on at the very beginning because they want to catch you and lure you into a trap and make you fall asleep, and then suddenly checkmate, and the game is over. And so great chess players will study the first moves of their opponents and understand, thoroughly what they're trying to accomplish and block them before they can do that. So that 8 or 10 moves down the line, they can't do what they intend to do, which is close the trap and secure the victory. And the good news for us is that the enemy is very predictable in his first move. And his first move is always the same thing. His primary attack against us is to cause us not to trust God. He doesn't want us to trust God, to believe God has our best interest in mind. His primary function is always get us focused on what we don't have, how God's cheating us, how God's keeping things from us, how God is not looking out for our best interest. And we don't have to look very far in Scripture to find that that's happening over and over and over again, and people are falling into that trap. Adam and Eve from the very beginning, all the trees in the garden, God says, are yours, you can partake of them, you can have them, but this one tree over here that's mine, and I don't even think it was the most beautiful tree in the garden. I often picture it as just, almost a shrub over here, and God says, this is mine, and don't take from this. But what does the enemy do? He says, God is not looking out for your best interest. He doesn't really care about you. There's something good over there, and he's holding it back from you because he knows in the day that you partake of that, you're going to be like him, and he doesn't want you to be like him. And they fall into that trap. Cain and Abel, we just heard this story read, and we see that Cain decides that he doesn't really trust God, so he's bringing God a portion. He doesn't know how his crops are going to turn out, and so he doesn't trust God has his back, and maybe the best stuff is not coming later, and so, I'll just offer God some of this stuff and not the best stuff, and then God can take that's fine, and then, I will have the good stuff, and if nothing else, great comes, then, at least I got the best stuff for me out of the beginning of the harvest. Sodom and Gomorrah, those of you who may remember that story, that at the end of the story, the climax of the story, the angels come in and they are taken into Lot's house, and these people who are given over to the lusts of mankind in a way that is frightening as we read through the scriptures, and they have the whole city to themselves. They have forced themselves upon everyone in the city, every unsuspecting. It's a place of anarchy and chaos. But they don't want what's in the city when they see what's gone in Lot's house. They want what's in Lot's house. Achan, very first battle of Jericho, God basically was saying there that, don't touch the city, don't take anything out of the city. I'm going to give it to you. I'm crushing the walls. You're going to go in and take them captive. You're going to destroy your enemy. But don't take anything out of that city. That's an offering to me. Leave everything on the ground, right where it is. Don't touch it. Achan didn't trust that God was going to provide for he and his family. Scooped up some of the good stuff, took it back and hid it in his house. God isn't really going to take care of me. God can't really be trusted. Saul didn't trust God with succession. God had the man picked out, David. Saul didn't trust it. He thought he was still the one to be adored by people, to be loved by the people. And he didn't trust what God was doing with David. Instead of lifting him up, saying, I see God's hand here, he tries to crush him and destroy him and kill him. He didn't trust God with succession. David, was talked about a moment ago with Bathsheba. Jake was telling us and reminding us of the story. He didn't trust God to provide all of his needs. He thought, I'll take care of this need myself. And the chaos that ensued as a result of what happened there. Sin calls into question God's authority, God's wisdom. Cain refused to give God what was required. He gave God what he wanted to give God, not what God was asking for. Now listen, there's no moral crime in his action, but it's sin. It's sin. Disobedience. He wanted to offer God less than what God required. bring what I want to bring to God, and I want God to go ahead and bless it, and everything should just be as it is. He's not really God. He's just someone that's pretty powerful, and I'll just give him something to please him, and that'll be it. I'm really not going to let him be leader and Lord over my entire life. The battle with sin is to not trust God. He chose to trust himself rather than to trust God. And we read about it clearly again in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4. The writer of Hebrews goes back to the story and explains to us what happened. Just what I was saying here. It was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man. He followed God. He obeyed God. He did what God was calling him to do. And God showed his approval of his gifts. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by his example of faith. So what is faith? Faith is not believing in God. Faith is trusting in God to take care of you every day, every need that you have. The opposite of faith is not fear. The opposite of faith is sin. Sin's sole objective is to kill faith in God, to cause you to stop trusting in God. And every time you stop trusting in God, sin overcomes. Sin wins out. Whenever we say God can't be trusted, sin starts dominion in our lives. Sin always leads to death. Scriptures that we read, the passage that Michelle read earlier, this made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. Instantly, upon acting in this manner, his countenance changed, his approach changes. He begins to be overcome by the destroyer of sin. I want to talk to you for just a moment. There's a number of things we could put in the blank here, but just about pornography for a minute. The argument by sin is that, or women in our day, that it does no harm. Now, if we discount the other perspectives of the deep damage that's done by over so many lives through pornography, and we just focus only on your individual situation and circumstance, at a minimum, pornography puts a wedge between a husband and a wife. It kills the intimacy that they once enjoyed. It destroys the act of love in the mind of the viewer and replaces it with a fantasy that can never be fulfilled, because this is what sin is always about. It's about creating a thirst that can never be quenched. No one can ever live up to what sin is trying to accomplish. It's a never-ending, never-quenching drink. A thirst that is broken. It breaks the life of the individual, and they're never able to be repaired by their own will, their own programs, their own actions. And where are we in this story? Take a look again for a moment at how God responds to Cain when he falls into sin. I invite our worship team to come, and I also would like to encourage those who are going to be helping with communion to just get ready. I want to walk you through something as we're closing out this morning that's very important in these last verses. Cain replied to the Lord after the Lord had dealt punishment on his life. He said, "My punishment is too great for me to bear. You have banished me from the land and from your presence." I think for a moment about the real pain of sin. I was thinking this morning about something that riveted me years ago. It was a mother who got in the car. She put her little babies in car seats, and she drove down the road towards the ocean in California, and she put her car in neutral, and she pushes that car into the ocean with all her babies in it. And it was so painful to hear that story and to think about the ramifications of that, not for those children, for the families, for the grandparents, for her to live with for the rest of her life. But in all of that, the greatest pain that Cain outlines here is, you have banished me from the land and from your presence. From your presence. And that's what sin does. It separates us from God. Anyone who finds me, he said, will kill me. And this is a beautiful picture of the grace and the mercy of God and the balance that God has. And so the Lord speaks back to him, and he replied, no, for I will give sevenfold punishment to anyone who kills you. Because regardless of what you've done, I love you. I'll never stop loving you. You're my child. And then the Lord put a mark on Cain to warn anyone who might try to kill him. And so Cain left the Lord's presence, and he settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Now I want to quickly walk you through what happened here. Cain said, you've banished me from the land and from your presence. Jesus on the cross cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you abandoned me? Cain said, you have made me a homeless wanderer. Jesus replied in Matthew 8:20, foxes have dens to live in, and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place even to lay his head. Cain said, anyone who finds me will kill me. And Jesus in Matthew 26:2 says, you know that the day after tomorrow is Passover. On that day, the Son of Man will be handed over to his enemies to be killed on a cross. So in God's grand plan, it wasn't Cain who was going to pay for his sin. Jesus paid it all. Jesus paid for the sin. Those who are dispensing the communion, if you would dispense those elements and you'd hang on to them, our worship team is going to lead in a song. Hold on to these elements. We'll come back and receive them together.